thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you on the eve of your departure, as it were. It's going to be, something else for us, as it were. But Joe, I thought we'd take this opportunity, to go back in time with you and finally maybe to look into the future. But please do give us a background to yourself. Who is Joe Alfers?
Oh, well, I've come out of, obviously, the previous dispensation in South Africa, so I'm a white English-speaking South African, which has all sorts of, cultural implications. But I come from immigrant families, as so many South Africans do. My family immigrated here, and I think, depending how far back you go, the bulk of people in South Africa have arrived here from elsewhere. So, but given that, I was actually brought up mainly in what is now KwaZulu-Natal, and was in the whole sort of Natal English thing, which had very kind of colonial undertones to it. So that was my kind of growing up experience. But what it led to when I went to a primary school in Pietermaritzburg and the high school, which was the traditional thing to do, and then on to the Pietermaritzburg campus of what was then Natal University. And I think there's where things started to kind of come together. It was one of the centres of the then Liberal Party. It was an English-speaking Liberal campus. And so we were quite rapidly conscientised about the situation in South Africa. So in that sense, I suppose by being exposed to I was a kind of liberal English-speaking South African. But inevitably, with all the kind of immigrant connections, there's all sorts of background stuff about, inevitably, many South Africans have odd connections all over the place. I'm supposed to be a Maronite. I'm not, I don't belong to any church or anything, but that was the whole growing up experience in that environment, which was extremely important in the way that I developed.
And what did you study then at university?
Well, that was a bit of a I didn't know what to study, so I went kind of the default route. So I did a BA with English and Political Science. And then the default was, well, because my father did law, so my mother said, well, why don't you just do law? Which was quite a thing. And it was a 2-year full-time degree, and it was quite challenging, and it was quite hard work. And I really enjoyed doing it, but in the course of that came up against, the kind of obstacles that then South Africa used to throw up. So being involved in student politics and in a particular project to start a law clinic, which were unknown in South Africa back then, we kind of, and then we got involved with the Wages Commission because as legal types, we thought we could sort it all out. So, getting involved in all that meant that I had a track record in student politics, and my now wife was kind of one of those leading figures. Came from a family of activists, so that was all kind of there. And so part of my, the way I financed my law degree was to work for the Department of Education. And the idea was that you worked during your study period. You studied and then you owed years of service afterwards. But the Department of Justice truncated that by dismissing me as soon as I graduated, because they obviously didn't want types like me. And Mr. Justice Bozelic, who's now a judge in the Western Cape High Court, both of us were shown the door on the same day.
Yes.
But the legal, I didn't think I was going to be a very good lawyer, and I was interested in images and documenting and things like that. So I took up photography, which in those days was just a matter of picking up a camera and teaching yourself how to use it. So that was the into photography. And then what triggered it even more so was that we went on a trip to Namibia for 3 months to look for scorpions, and I just photographed the whole thing. And when I got back, on the strength of those photographs, I was offered a job in a studio. And that kind of set off the whole photographic thing. But, having had 5 years at university, obviously, changes the way you think. It informs what you do to a greater extent, and how you deal with the thing. And of course, South Africa in the 70s and 80s there was quite a lot of stuff going on that one could get involved with. So that's basically, that's where I come from, and that's how I developed into the things that I did and started out.
I'd like to pick up back again on the photography angle of it. This takes you to work with David Weinberg, and then there is the point of where's the Lesotho connection within that. Could you just give me some ideas?
Paul Weinberg and I he's quite a bit younger than me, but we grew up in Maritzburg together. And when I was busy becoming a photographer, he was starting to study, and he seemed to have run into the same problem that I did. So, and he came to me and said, he quite wants to be a photographer. And I said, well, go for it. Because that was my experience, and it was turning out right. But I think because of our background, both Paul and I were very interested in documenting and, I suppose, bearing witness to what was going on around us. And so that kind of drove me, quite a bit into that field of documentary photography. But I've always had to work as a photographer to pay the bills, and then the documentary stuff has always been on the side. So that was, kind of apprenticeship in a photographic studio. And then I was offered a job at the Natal Witness as a photographer, which opened me up to all the news photography, which is a different sort of discipline. And then I was on a job in Johannesburg for the Witness, and came across the Rand Daily Mail people, and they offered me a job there, which I couldn't refuse. So that experience kind of broadened my view of what was going on. I met people like Alf Kamalo, and Ruda Ngwenya, and quite a lot of the black photographers that were just not around in KwaZulu-Natal. And we did quite a lot of work together. But then as a result, we were visiting a friend in Lesotho. It's actually Jeff Guy, the historian, who was an old friend of my wife's family, and he was teaching at the Roma campus, and we went down, bumped into his next door neighbour who was setting up a project to document rock art. Now, in my growing up period, I spent a lot of time hiking in the Drakensberg, because it's right there and it's a wonderful place to hike, so I was quite adept at hiking. And then this job offer came up, which seemed to indicate that we would be paid to hike around Lesotho, as well as take photographs. So that was, it was quite accidental, because while I was at the Rand Daily Mail, a vacancy came up at the Witness again for chief photographer, and they offered me that. So it was one of those forks in the road. If I went back to Maritzburg, I'd probably still be there.
You haven't exactly abandoned your rock art images and all that. Where is the state of play with your images and what you intend to do with all that as a project?
Okay. So the images belong to the project, and the project doesn't really belong to anybody, but it's there. I'm currently the administrator of the project. But the University of Leiden, who financed, or they were the channel for the funding that funded the project for 4 years in Lesotho. I'm not quite sure why, but they weren't interested in keeping the collection. It did go back to Holland, and then I, about 10 years later, raised the issue of cultural imperialism. They took our pictures, and they should be back here. Because at that stage, duplicating those things was difficult and expensive, and it wasn't in the digital era. So I got together with the head of archaeology at UCT and the director of the Rock Art Research Institute, and we formed an association called the South African Rock Art Digital Archive. And from having set that up, we got considerably generous funding from Mellon Foundation. Now they are interested in visual stuff and images. They run the Art Store global archive of art images. And so they were quite happy to put quite substantial money into this. So we were able to ship that collection, the Arrow collection, back. And because it had been organised in that particular way, in that it's kind of went from 1 to 10, left to right, top to bottom, and it was all sort of computer ready without actually being designed for computers. So it was the logical thing to be the first collection that was digitised. So it was shipped back from Holland, and it's now still at the Rock Art Research Institute at Wits. And it's been sitting there for some 15 years, and the whole collection has been digitised. There are 35,000 images. It represents about 720 sites in Lesotho. But our extrapolating onto the geological maps, we think that that's about 20% of what there is in Lesotho. So there's a huge number of sites there. So what's happened now is that it's kind of coming full circle. So the project is ready to be revived in a slightly different guise. I mean, the collection is there, and there is need for training guides in Lesotho. So what I'm currently involved in is I've written a concept document, and we are in the process of starting fundraising and to get funds to do the things that we've laid out in the concept document. But just in the last month, we got information that the Lesotho National Museum is about to be built in Maseru. This is the same museum that was supposed to be built in 1979 when we started the project. They were going to, and the Arrow collection was going to end up in the museum, and then they never built the museum. So that's why that whole thing unraveled. Anyway, it's come around, and I've been approached by the museum consultant to say, well, what are we going to do? So apart from making the display, the physical archive will stay at the Rock Art Research Institute. It's central. It's got proper storage facilities, and it's accessible, and it's been digitised. So the material from that can be made available to the museum whenever they want. We can produce display material and slideshows and site reports and all the rest of it. But the idea now is that we use the museum as the funding platform, and we need to now approach people like UNESCO or multinational organisations like UNESCO and and perhaps even the Mellon Foundation again and people like that, because the four things that we want to do is firstly set up a scholarship program for students to study the existing material that's in an archaeology department. So that's fairly straightforward, just need money. Secondly, we need to set up guide training in Lesotho, because what we've discovered over the years is that the best way to preserve the paintings is if the local population have a vested interest in them. So instead of fencing them off and trying to keep everybody out, what we're going to do is train local people to be guides, train them how to handle the sites. And what we found in the couple of areas where we've had pilots going is that once there's a vested interest, then there are no longer animals in the shelters, there's no longer fires being built under the paintings and so on and so on. So the second thing is to set up a guide training program in Lesotho for the guides. And then the third thing is to combine the two, the scholarship people, if that comes about, and the guides need to combine, because as we say, we think that we've only found 20% of what there is. So they need to search further and find all the other sites and record them. And the technology has come along so far now that you can get a camera with a built-in GPS, and so you take the picture and then you've got all the information, where it is and what it looks like. So that's all quite different. And then the third thing is then to to set up the administration of the project so that all the scholarships can be dished out and the guide training can be organised and all that. So that's all in the concept document. So that project it's still up in the air, and whether or not it happens really depends on getting funding. But that has come around again, after 30 years. It's starting again.
That's great. If I may now take you back to where Rhodes University comes in, at what point do you decide that you must make the great trek to Grahamstown?
Okay, that wasn't actually my decision. I was here by force of circumstance. I mean, my wife Helen was, she actually had extensive experience in Bophuthatswana homeland, as it was then, in black secondary education as an English teacher and an academic skills teacher. And so she was recruited to come down to Rhodes because there was a bit of a migration from what was then called Unibo, the University of Bophuthatswana, to Grahamstown. I don't know why, but I mean people like Pat Irwin, Sarah Murray, Clive Smith, who was here before, Jops Bodenstein, who's head of the Legal Aid Clinic, all sort of drifted down. It seemed to be the natural migration route from Mafeking to Grahamstown. So that's how they knew what Helen did here, and so they recruited her. And then so it was her turn to get a job, so I had to drag along behind. The only thing that was open and in any way related to what I did was temporary post as a TV studio manager in the Department of Journalism. And so I was interviewed by Christo Doherty, and then Guy Berger agreed, and then that's when. So that was a 1-year post. At the end of that year, it was actually then made into a permanent appointment, which is what I've been on ever since. But I was initially the TV studio manager, and what I did in Bophuthatswana at the University of Bophuthatswana was create a multimedia production facility, which did photography, photographic processing, video filming, desktop publishing. We were one of the early adopters of desktop publishing. So I had that kind of multimedia experience, and had done a bit of video and film production. So I was first manager of the TV studio, and then it evolved, and it just went into. Then I was production manager for broadcast. That was TV and radio, and then Guy Berger started with these kind of mad ideas about moving people, which created a lot of tension. But, and then the post kind of came up, well, somebody's got to see to the technology, so that's where the technology manager post came in. So I think that was about 2001, 2. But in the meantime, the technology was centred on the television and radio. It was centred in broadcast. The writing people were still using pen and paper and typewriters and things.
So now the evolution of your role and its link to the concept of the African Media Matrix, what was the thinking behind the move from the old Department of Journalism now into this form? And what did it entail? I know it's quite broad.
Yes, I think the things that were happening in parallel were that the technology was evolving. We were obviously moving into the beginning stages of the digital era, and I think QTV was pretty central to that whole way of thinking, because it was a broadcast medium. But it pulled in all sorts of other things. So it needed writing, it needed images, it needed filming. And so it was kind of the precursor of a multimedia output, which, in education institutions, the output's quite often difficult because it's expensive and things. And there, Christo Doherty played a key role in that. There was some funding, available there, but Christo went out and got a serious amount of money, and so QTV used to run on a budget of about 600,000 rand a year, to do the broadcast, some of it in kind, like Telcom bandwidth or multi-choice bandwidth, and they would give us the bandwidth and then we would do the stuff. But I think that kind of, and it obviously became a much more technological operation than having, students with a camera on a tripod in a studio and then just filming each other. So once you kind of rack up to broadcast level, there's all kinds of stuff that has to happen so that you can do it. And I think that coincided with the feeling that, because you might remember then that journalism was in about 6 different locations around the campus. The photojourn was over at Eden Grove, and the radio was where Barrett is now, and the newsroom was across the road, and I mean all that was in the middle, in the old drama building, was the TV studio and everybody's offices. So, and really it was Guy's vision that kind of drove that. I mean, he envisaged pulling it all together, but parallel with the fact that the media technology was developing in such a way that it needed to be together. That people could produce things in a convergent way, and it's a problematic term and it still doesn't really have a meaning, but it was the whole business of bringing stuff together so that it could produce media across all the different media types. So, I mean, the initial building plan, because Guy, as his wont, just flew off to Joburg and got an architect to draw something, turned out to be a 5-story glass tower, which was going to go next to Eden Grove, and then we would populate the Bots Garden and all the rest of it, and have an atrium with a tree growing in it and all the rest of it. And but the bill for that back in the late 90s was astronomical. So the Vice Chancellor just took one look at it and kind of left the room. So what I did then, then I sat down with Guy and we came up with, then we looked at, what might be possible. And then, fortuitously, the Lurie building, which was this building, had been sitting derelict for some time, and there was about 5 million rand in government funding that had been put towards refurbishing it, which was from the Department of Education, not from Rhodes University. So the idea was to refurbish old buildings on campuses. And so that, and then of course Guy sort of raised a substantial amount of money. I mean, I think more than half of the cost of this building. And that kind of drove it. Then we had to have a plan. So we had to sit down and work out how everybody was going to fit in. And because we had a different boundary, it was these 4 walls around the outside here. So, but initially we were going to have bigger TV studios and bigger radio studios, and there were going to be 2 wings on the side. But that concept went to senior management and council, and they said, this is too much, you can't have these wings. So the architects just folded up their tent and went back to Port Elizabeth. But Guy and I sat down and said, well, somehow we've got to fit the 2 wings into the existing building and reduce the cost. So things aren't altogether logical in the building. The TV studio is in the middle. The TV studio is in fact in what was an atrium in the old building. And then radio has been squashed into the basement, which was the chemical store, and so on and so on. So we managed to squeeze it all in and come up with a... So, Guy drove the ideas and the concept, and I was sitting there with pencil and paper, drawing things and measuring things and trying to make them fit. And we came up with a floor plan for 3 levels, which then we got the architects to draw up. And that was the plan that was accepted. Largely on the basis that, Guy raised a huge amount of money to finance it.
But looking back as it were now, would you say that in terms of convergence of technologies, as it were, that this has been a success in terms of now people, all the disciplines, as it were, of maybe you might call it of journalism in one place, and maybe your teachers here beginning to understand, the concept of both the physical space and obviously the technology and how these must converge, as it were. On that, do you have a sense that we have grasped that? And
I think it's still a work in progress, because we still don't have a kind of full multimedia thing. And every time you say multimedia and convergence, quite a lot of people just look blank, because it hasn't got a real sort of presence. I mean, we know that there are convergent newsrooms and people doing multimedia stuff out of newsrooms, but I think we still see the kind of tension between the different disciplines here. My intention, and because I did quite a lot of research, what I proposed was that we provide a platform, and inevitably it had to be a digital one.
Yes.
So, and then whatever was being done, I mean, we had enormous arguments about, because we briefly had a conventional darkroom. And that was because I lost that argument, because we should never have had that, but if we hadn't, we wouldn't have had our tea room. But so there was that quite a serious conflict between the conventional analog technology and the digital technology, which of course in the 90s was still developing in the early 2000s. Yes. So the concept of creating a digital platform, because not knowing how the technologies would develop and how the different media specializations would integrate. I mean, I think in the early 2000s, the thought was that everything, just one person would be able to do everything on a computer, if we could make the computer work. But that was the big battle. Yes. So the idea was to create a digital platform and to separate it from the university's system. So that's why we've got our own server room and data center and our own cable setup with provided with cabling and all the rest of it, so that whatever happened, we would be in a position to meet those needs. So, I mean, we've grown from. I mean, when we moved here, we had, about 80 workstations and one server. And now we run 250 workstations and 15 servers. So that's developed, but I'm not sure that, there's been parallel development in the actual media production. Some disciplines have progressed faster than others, and there's been some integration between some disciplines and then not others. And I think we see that reflected in the various school meetings and things about how things are being done. And that the fact that we don't have to get a broadcast license, we can stream television live, which the students have demonstrated is quite possible with the machinery that we got. And particularly the student press at the moment are using the television studio for live daily television shows. So that's much easier than it was. But the integrate, like Q newspaper, for instance, is still a newspaper, and the website is kind of struggling along behind it. And I mean, that's mainly, it's I suppose it's to do with the necessity of integrating things into the curriculum and those kind of things. So I think it's been a difficult thing, but my view is that the platform is there.
Yes.
Just about anything that's possible digitally can be done on the AMM domain.
Yeah.
And so that was the purpose of the building. So to that extent, the building has been a success. People seem to find it a comfortable place to work. Yes. It allows us to do what we need to do. In other words, it allows people in that are supposed to be in and keeps the people out who are not supposed to be in, and those kind of things. So it in fact runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which was always one of the big obstacles in the past, with keys and access to things and all the rest of it. Students have, in fact, got a very powerful base on which to work. They've got big workstations, they've got plenty of space, they've got access to things, and they can get in and out when they need to. Yes. So to that extent, I think the design concept has been successful. But I mean, there's just a lot of wrinkles along the way, and it's mainly, I think, to do with how the actual business of dealing with media in the digital domain is developing, which is quite a complicated business.
Yes.
So in that sense, I think the technical side is there and it's working, and in fact, with the help of the skilled staff we've had in the past, it's reasonably bulletproof. It's quite robust. It keeps going. But it's a matter of whether are we going to do online newspapers, or are we going to have daily streaming broadcasts and those kind of things, which need to come together, and how the disciplines going to interact.
Yes.
Because there's still quite a strong feeling that this is this lab and that's that lab, and they need to be in a separate place.
Yes. No, I hear you, but I can also vouch for the soundness of our technical platform here because of a conference that we do run each year, of course, the Highway Africa Conference. Now, Joe, you have been involved from the outset of this conference, as it were. What do you recall of the origins of this, annual gathering of African journalists?
Well, I do remember the first conference because it was something of a surprise. I was, quietly getting on with my business in the TV studio, and then I think it was Roland Stanbridge came pounding up the stairs and said, "Oh, we've got this conference going, and we need to record it." And of course, this is after it started. As usual in journalism, you find out about things after they've started. So I heard somewhere that there was going to be a conference, and they were having it in the Rhodes Theatre. And so suddenly into the theatre, and the theatre lighting is not appropriate, so I had to drag out a SVHS camera and set up some lighting, and then just record the speakers, the presenters. And there was a podium on the stage with a panel, and then everybody was sitting in the theatre. So that's, and I think it was 2 or 3 days. And there were a lot of interesting people around, and Roland and Guy were driving it along. And that was the beginning. And then, of course, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger after that. And as it evolved every year, and of course, being based on digital media in Africa, there was it was seen to be necessary to demonstrate all the stuff that was going on. So that meant interacting with suppliers and setting things up to demonstrate stuff. And in those early days, of course, cell phones didn't do what they do now, and computers certainly didn't do what they do now. It was always a bit of a battle, but we managed to do things like set up interactive seminar sessions. So we built a machine that was pretty big. It was about 3 computers on a trolley with all sorts of connections which could encode video of a seminar presentation, feed it into the server, and then get questions back via the chat line, which would then come up as text on the bottom of the screen. So it was very clunky, very early stuff. But that's the kind of thing that was, this is the digital era and we can do these things. But it grew quite rapidly, and I think when Christo Doherty was he was, as always, enormously ambitious. So if we're not broadcasting TV, then we should be doing something big and shiny. So I think the one that we had, I forget which year it is, but it was in the Life Sciences building, which we completely swamped, and we had truckloads of technology from Johannesburg, and laser lights and broadcast stuff and all sorts of things going on, and it blew every fuse in the place. It was a complete nightmare from that point of view. And then, of course, when the SABC got involved, that got more complicated because of the, having to set up the outside broadcast units and cable them in and provide them with their 5 nines reliability connection, because they always want things to be really reliable. But I think I think the conference picked up a lot of momentum then because people were interested, and the technology was new, and I think it touched a whole lot of relevant areas. And I think it's just evolved continuously since then. I think I do. You know, as the technology has evolved and become more transparent,
yes,
it's less visible, but it makes all these things even more possible than they were before. So you can sit as a delegate and have your phone plugged into the Wi-Fi, be doing stuff on your tablet, and then going away and writing things on your laptop, all connected to the network, and then taking pictures and uploading them and all that kind of stuff, which was supposed to be, that's what Highway Africa was supposed to show, has eventually happened. But I think also, the conference has also evolved into a much more kind of intellectual content and issues and things like that. I'm sure you know, as the years we've worked together, I've certainly seen that develop in terms of who's speaking and what issues they're addressing, and the technology itself has become less and less, or perhaps more transparent, but much more effective. And I think the kind of peak of that was perhaps when we had that rather large and cumbersome joint conference with World Journalism Educators.
Yes, exactly.
But we did manage to have
Journalism Educators Conference.
12 parallel video streams going out of the building at the same time until somebody sat on a cable in Egypt and cut us off. But it worked.
Yes.
So the video conferencing thing, which was the kind of new thing then, was we could do 12 parallel streams at the same time out of this building. To some extent, kind of validated the design and the facilities that were available here.
And also over the past 2 years, the Wi-Fi somehow.
Yeah.
How would you explain just the exponential kind of improvement?
Well, it's been a long time coming because, Wi-Fi is obviously what needed to happen.
Yes.
But what happened 2 years ago was the new iteration of the 802 wireless protocol, which is what all the computers and phones work on. Developed a new protocol based on 5 gigahertz bandwidth. The old system worked on 2.4 gigabits. And as we discovered by practical experimentation, if you had more than 20 concurrent log-ons on the old system, it just stopped working because it couldn't cope with the thing. The 5 gigahertz has got a much shorter range, but at the last time in Africa we had 185 concurrent logins, and we didn't have anybody who couldn't connect and do what they needed to do. So once again, it's the technology that's... But I think, just to go back to the conference content, there was a lot more discussion about issues about, democracy and journalism and what journalists are doing rather than about technology. The technology isn't really discussed anymore because it's there and it's working.
Yes.
So I don't know if you feel the same, but I've certainly noticed that progression as time has gone along.
But do you have a sense that journalists themselves have understood the role of technology in the newsroom?
Well,
or for them, it's just now somewhere in the background, it's just there and they just work with it?
No, I think journalists are struggling. Some of them, and particularly the younger ones are, they're quite hip with it. And I just was looking at, places like, some of the smaller, kind of newer newsrooms in the metropolitan centres where reporters are expected to go out with an SLR that is video enabled, their cell phone, and a tablet. And they've got to work all three of those things, and they've got to feed content in from all of them. And they've got to keep their Twitter feed up, and they've got to post to the Facebook, and they've got to take pictures, and they've got to do video. And I'm not sure. I know that I think they're drowning. They're not. And I think probably, I don't really keep an eye on those kind of about the content stuff.
Yes.
But I suspect that the content suffers when you're trying to get too few people to do too many things. So my feeling, I suppose, I come out of the pre-digital age, is that people need to understand the medium that they're using. So if you're taking pictures, you need to know how to take a picture. I'm always slightly shocked every time I'm on a top international news program, and all you see is some kind of cell phone video waving around in the desert. It doesn't really. I mean, it never passed muster before. They would never have used it, but now, of course, it's there. It's real. It happens. But that, of course, is the non-journalist feeding stuff into the journalism thing. But I think there's still a struggle between being an expert at a medium, like writing or taking photographs or making films, and then being required to operate across all three of those things is a real struggle.
Now, my very final question, Joe, will be, for a media educator sitting out here in the School of Journalism, how should they respond to that changing world in order for them to produce the kind of journalists that will go and fit in that world and maybe be able to do the kind of journalism that the audiences do deserve?
I think one of the problems that faces an institution like this, because we, in terms of journalism education, are sitting at the top of the pile, is that it's a very multi-layered discipline. I mean, there's reporting, and then there's analysis, and then there's opinion, and so on and so on. And I mean, it gets more sophisticated and requires more kind of understanding. And I mean, my feeling is that this school of journalism at a university obviously needs to be doing the higher level stuff. But in order to do that, the students need to know how to do the basics. And I'm not sure what the answer is yet in terms of the multimedia things. I mean, some people adapt to it quite easily. They can go and take notes at a story while they've got the camera running on a video thing, and then put the whole thing together, and it pops up on a web page.
Yes.
So, but I certainly haven't sorted out in my own mind what's best in terms of teaching distinct disciplines. And as a photographer of some years' experience, you've got to learn to take pictures. I mean, good pictures take effort. But of course, it's not always the case in news, because news is just what you manage to get a picture of. And I think Robert Capa, the famous, he was a photojournalist. He was one of the founders of what became photojournalism. He was a war photographer in the Second World War, and he did the photographs of the Normandy landing and all that kind of stuff. Spanish Civil War, famous. And people would ask him, as a news photographer, how do you take a picture? And he just said, it's F8 and be there. So it just meant the simplest setting on your camera, and you just needed to be there, and you would get the picture. So in a sense, news is a slightly different animal from, say, documentary work, which needs reflection and processing and those kind of things. So I think it's really difficult for people who are studying now, because the technology makes all these things possible. But what is it that you're going to concentrate on? It's a tyranny of choice. But I suspect that the web must be the output for all this, because it can absorb all the different things. It can do video, audio, pictures, text, hyperlinks, linking to stuff and bringing stuff in and constantly updating and allowing interactivity. So, I mean, for me, if just in the current context, that what we call new media and photojournalism should actually be taught across the board. They shouldn't be their specializations. They should be platform things. Everybody needs to know how to work a website. Everybody needs to know how to take a picture. And then, of course, writing is fundamental to all of it. So in a way, I suppose, if they broke down the silos and layered it in a slightly different way, we might be dealing with the whole, what's called convergent media in a more kind of effective way. Sorry, just turn that down. But I think that's the thing with the technology makes all this possible, but how the content is being dealt with. And I think we see young journalists who going into the field now are in fact content managers. A lot of them they've got to grapple with a whole range of stuff in order to pull it together. So I think that the school obviously is looking at it, and it needs to concentrate on that kind of stuff.
No, yeah, thank you so much, Joe. I just would like to get your parting shots to us here in the School of Journalism, with those that remain, won't hold you to it. Okay.
I mean, it's certainly been an experience working here, and one of the highlights, of course, has been working with you and developing Highway Africa, which is now, as we know, I mean, it's a global brand situated in Africa, and I think that's an amazing achievement. So that's largely due to your very hard work. And so it's been a really interesting experience participating in that and providing support, and then seeing that things actually happen. Has been very rewarding. And I think a similar thing, working with someone like Guy Berger, who's not only mad but a visionary. Being able to kind of bring some of that to fruition has been very satisfying. But and in a way, I mean, the journalism has always been regarded as a fairly maverick department. It doesn't really belong in a university because it's an applied thing, and it's a trade and an industry. But it's in that class of applied humanities, which makes it difficult for conventional university people to understand what we're up about. So. In that sense, I mean, a lot of what we've achieved has been in spite of the university. I mean, we've been given the space and the thing, but we've had to fight quite hard for what it is that we do, and we are still, as you well know, constrained in all sorts of ways that don't make life easy. So that's been it's been a struggle, and the thought is, comes up every now and again about whether School of Journalism belongs in university or should it be in some other kind of thing. But I think that's something, obviously, that the current people involved will obviously have to think about. It's obviously not going to move out of university, but whether or not it can create a more amenable space for what's required in this digital age remains to be seen. What I hope is that the platform that we've got allows people to get on and do what they're doing, or do what they need to do.